Hey, it's Jason, and I'm handing it over to my content partner, Eric Brandstetter, for a special series with Chrissy Manwaring at Robertson Marketing called Psychology of Swag.
Welcome back to the Psychology of Swag. We've covered why we keep things and why most merch fails. Today we're talking about the buying process itself and why procurement thinking kills strategic merchandise programs. Chrissy, I'm guessing you've sat through some pretty painful vendor selection meetings. And not to generalize, but how does procurement typically think about merchandise? What's the overall mindset?
Well, and I want to say there are some amazing procurement professionals out there that don't think this way. So please do not think, for my amazing procurement peeps, that I'm trying to criticize you. But I have encountered in my career enough people that don't have a strategic approach to know that this can be the killer. When people are so hyper focused on the cost per unit, the bulk pricing and the lowest bidder, and they're trying to treat branded merchandise like office supplies, that they completely lose the plot on what they're trying to accomplish within the organization, and ultimately, they're not delivering any value for the organization.
Yeah. So I know and I can only imagine working with some of the international companies that you work with. There are buying committees, people that range from executives through maybe an intern, for example, as you mentioned in the last episode. We can have lots and lots of stakeholders as part of this process. Walk me through who's typically in the room and what they should each care about in this process.
Yeah, so when we're working with these larger organizations, they have so many stakeholders. You obviously have procurement driving the show because they do have a strategic imperative to control costs for the organization to deliver the greatest value. And I love using kind of the example of a body, if you'll follow with me through here, that procurement, I kind of think of them as the nervous system of an organization because they're controlling both the costs and they're very connected to the strategic priorities from the executive team, but they're touching every finger and toe and the lungs and the heart, and they are flowing throughout the entire organization when they're coordinating with the stakeholders. And then you have HR, and we're going to think about them as the hands of the organization because they are hands-on. It's their people that are delivering the value throughout the organization. They care about the employee experience. And so they're very much intrinsic to this whole process. But then you have marketing and brand alignment, and that's kind of like the blood flow or the circulatory system of this body, that you've got to think things consistency. Does everybody have the resources that they need to deliver on the whole company's objectives? Operations and logistics, that is your skeleton. You're not getting anywhere without it. And then we think about some of the executive functions of the organization as well, either operations and legal, sustainability, those different initiatives that come into play. That's all the musculature and the framework. And so if you think of brand as skinning the organization, what people see from the outside, it's this entire ecosystem, the physical organization, that everybody has a part to play, and the entire body is not going to function without everybody in turn doing their part. And so when they come to the table, they all have different priorities when it comes to branded merchandise. And marketing wants it to look good. They want it to be consistent. They want it to have the functional representation of the brand and be this good artifact. But procurement's only focused on budget, and so sometimes those can butt heads a little bit. Every single stakeholder, it's so important to them, but for such different reasons. And so when those different governing priorities collide, sometimes you have, procurement that brings on a vendor that on paper looks perfect, the cost is all aligned, but then they don't have the flexibility to get each of these individual stakeholder groups the experience that they need to deliver to their end users. HR needs to handle onboarding globally, and they want to have a unique and consistent experience for these new hires that are coming on board. And if procurement didn't negotiate technologies and, the logistics on the back end of what that's going to look like because they were so focused on cost over here, all of a sudden their costs shoot through the roof as they have to bring on secondary vendors to deliver the experience that should have been part of the conversation for each of these stakeholder groups from the beginning. And so it's just, procurement is not an easy job.
Yeah.
And they're part therapist, they're part analyst. They are directing change management efforts that are logistical nightmares, and it's so much emotion involved. is everybody's trying to get what they want and make it the highest priority. And sometimes they fail to communicate critical elements to procurement in the process that then turn around in the end after vendors are selected and their needs are not met. And so then the spend goes rogue, and then brand gets involved because the products that are produced are not brand compliant. And then it could be a lot of drama. It
Yeah. Well,
really
you get
can be.
conflicting interests, right? Everybody's kind of curious about how can they make sure that they win, because they're responsible for that. How do you support that conversation? How do you come in? What should the role of a vendor be maybe in those dynamics of the conversations and relationships? What does a good, support system from a vendor like you look like?
I mean, from a great vendor, they're going to understand the scope of the program across an entire organization and be able to bring some of those insights back into procurement and say, okay, ask them literally, who's at the table and who else should be at the table when you're making these decisions, and kind of having a roadmap or a high level overview of how this category touches all of the different pieces of an organization so that you can bring those, surface some of those known issues at the very beginning of the conversation so that it doesn't become a surprise at the end. Because the best value for the organization is when you do have, one or two primary vendors that have deep relationships. They can work hand in hand with brand and become the brand police and prevent, the special use cases from being created that are not brand compliant, that they can work one-on-one with individual stakeholders when you do have a custom project that's outside, the primary scope of the ask. And I will say this, that typically procurement gets involved when somebody in accounting recognizes we're spending a lot of money on merch, or they recognize that we have had vendor proliferation. There was a great example with a real estate company we were working with, and I had a conversation with their procurement director. And I asked her, what's your biggest headache category? And she said, promotional products. Do you realize we have 250 balloon vendors in our system? Because different agents had gone on and they were all buying balloons for open houses and they were all getting them branded, and they would all go to a different vendor. And so you'd end up with all different colors and all different logos and all different, and the cost savings on the back end are completely lost unless you make that a uniform product. If you have 250 vendors just for balloons, wouldn't it make more sense to have a company site where you're buying balloons in bulk? The vendor, employees could go on, buy the balloons they needed for their open house, and it would all be uniform, consistent. There's a massive cost savings that procurement can deliver in that situation. Brand is happy. Procurement's happy. The end user is happy because they're not wasting time searching the internet to go buy balloons. And so the company realizes, okay, we need a company store. And that's usually where it starts. But the problem is sometimes in the moment, that's also where it stops. And so they create a company store that has balloons and one or two other items. And people only buy balloons once or twice a year. And so then they forget that the store is there in between buying cycles. And so you also need champions within an organization that are going to make sure that this technology or this company store or whatever solution is created then goes on to meet the needs of these other stakeholders. So if our boots on the ground sales team needs to be able to buy balloons for open houses, get them quickly, inexpensively, perfect, we've met that need. Now, what's the need for HR? What's the need for other events buyers? What's the need for, the marketing stakeholders? What's the need for the sales organization on a higher level for closed deal gifts for these different, it just becomes a giant hairball, Eric.
Right.
And so you need a vendor that can help you understand all the hairs that get added to that hairball and why they come on board, and kind of brush all the tangles out and say, okay, here's what you really need as an overall solution. And, so again, when the RFP comes in and they're doing a single use case, let's have that conversation with procurement. Is this part of a larger organizational problem, and what other solutions might you want to consider to solve for the organization?
Yeah. So it sounds like you're talking about the difference between sourcing and strategy. Sourcing being I can just go buy things. Strategy is I have a reason, I have a purpose. There's intention and thought behind it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, strategy is about where do we go to market, who's our customer. And in procurement, your customers are all the stakeholders within your organization, or all of your business partners within your organization. And so they really need to understand the needs of all of those different stakeholders, and to have a partner, within an organization that understands how all those stakeholders are going to leverage promotional products and what they need, not just from the product, the commodity standpoint, but also the support, the technology, and the end user experience they're delivering to their customers and stakeholders. Because it actually goes typically 4 layers deep between the procurement and then the stakeholder and then the customer, ultimately out to the end user. And so thinking through all those logistics, there's great opportunity for the procurement teams to add value, not just save cost. And understanding how those two purposes are completely intertwined within a promotional spend category. It is so deceptively complex. And when you think on the surface, for a procurement team that's going out and they're just buying paper, it's easy to go to 2 mills and say, you need 8.5 by 11, 100-pound paper. What's your cost? But now when you're talking about, I need t-shirts and I need mugs and I need pens and I need all these commodities across all these categories, and I need to deliver them in 7 countries, and I need to deliver them across these borders, and I need to have the end user have this experience, you've got some logistical complexity that's entering this equation that's going to have impacts on tariffs that are going to massively impact costs. And understanding when you need to produce in region, when do you need to produce centrally and distribute regionally, when it comes down to so much more than how much do you charge for 5,000 stitches of embroidery on a polo shirt.
Yeah. Is there kind of a rule of thumb, or when does it make sense to pay more for a strategic partner versus, just finding a vendor that does the thing that you need done?
It really comes down to the complexity of the program, if, the need for consultation, and if you're looking for a long-term relationship. I mean, the reality is everybody knows somebody who can embroider a shirt and who can screen print a shirt. There are thousands of vendors that can do that. But do you have the logistical support, the technology support, the billing support? What systems need to be integrated? How are users going to access the system? Do we need to integrate with single sign-on? How much security does this data need to have in transit? You're dealing with this point with personal identifiable information. I mean, the security implications of a lot of this come into play as well. And so when you're thinking about the complexity of that program and the needs for consultation across the scope of the program, across the products themselves, across the security, when you're dealing with a product that's going to touch everybody in the organization, everybody in your organization needs to have a representative or an ambassador at the table when those decisions are made. And at that point, the costs are going to come out either on the labor internally as your team tries to figure out all these problems, or you can pay for these problems that your vendor is going to handle for you because they already have the experience and expertise to smooth out these stumbling blocks you're going to encounter on the way.
Yeah, because you don't know what you don't know. So being able to rely on that, expert, trusted partner to help guide you through and ask the questions and provide the suggestions and recommendations for how to not stumble along the way. It's critically important.
Absolutely.
Is there a time you could tell me from your own experience where you started out, or maybe an organization started out being more transactional and then ended up becoming transformational because of what we just said? Because you or your organization provided that expert service, that expert help, expert suggestions that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a number of times where we'll be approached and it's a small RFI or a small RFP, request for information or request for a proposal. And the scope of it is just for this one application. So it's like a holiday gifting experience, right? So they just want to do this one experience, but procurement gets involved because they've chosen the product they want to use and now they're trying to find the cheapest vendor to deliver the product. And so again, the ask comes into us. I need to buy 1,200 of these wine glasses because we're going to do an end of year Christmas toast for our entire organization. It's like, okay, tell me more about what are you trying to communicate? What is it you're trying to do this? What is the purpose of the promotion? And then when we unlock the purpose, okay, well, tell me about the complexity. Well, we have most of the people are in the US, but, and I always listen for that but. We have 70 people actually it ended up being like 120 people in the UK, 70 people across EMEA. Oh, yeah, and we have 17 people are in India. It's like, okay, so you just switched the logistics on us a little bit. So let's go back. And so we start diving into this process and realizing what exactly they need to deliver. And as you understand, it's more than just the cheapest wine glass. What we actually are trying to communicate is, celebrate, a toast to us, cheers. What about instead of using a wine glass, what if we did the pubware wine glass that's unbreakable? And you're communicating this unbreakableness and you're celebrating your accomplishments. That now logistically, here's how we're going to get the 17 in India. Here's how we're going to do the 120 in EMEA. Here's how we're going to handle, the distribution in the US. And then the scope of the project changes. And they're like, okay, well, now can we add the bottle of wine? Can we ship the wine with them? We need to have a conversation about shipping alcohol within the United States alone. Alcohol laws vary county to county and state to state, and it is illegal to ship alcohol to some places, and only authorized vendors can ship alcohol. Can we help you with this? Absolutely, we can. But okay, let's have a conversation about this because alcohol itself is also very divisive. It is either a home run or a swing and a miss. So you now need to consider giving your employees a choice. Do you all want them to have the same experience? And what is that experience going to be like? And maybe we need to offer them a gift of choice where they can choose the alcohol or they can choose a non-alcoholic beverage companion. And so the more we start consulting with them it was just supposed to be who can send the cheapest gift, right? But there is scope creep and there is intent creep. And now we're getting into what is the user experience going to be like and how do we facilitate the opportunity for the employee to choose between this and this and the logistics of it. And so it's always interesting to see who within an organization ends up owning promotional products and then asking them, how much time do you spend dealing with swag issues? And their faces are just like, oh my gosh, I spend 80% of my time dealing with people that got the wrong size t-shirt, or they want to take the t-shirt out of the store and they want to add their team logo on it. And 80% of my time is sucked into dealing with this swag issue. And if I can get procurement on the call with me, the same time that employee expresses that frustration, then I can have a conversation with procurement afterwards and I can say, I don't know what the payroll structure looks like within your organization, but it sounds like you are already spending somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a month in that employee's time dealing with these issues. Is that employee's job? Are they the best in the world at that? Or do you want to outsource that to this team? And if you're going to end up paying $1 more per t-shirt to never have that headache on your employee's hands, you can demonstrate that cost savings and that added value. But if the conversation is limited to, I've sent you this spreadsheet, what's your lowest cost on this, I can't add value on that. I can tell you how much we're going to charge you for it, and you're going to see that it's $1 more than somebody else, and you're going to think they're not worth it. But at the end of the day, they're going to spend more dealing with all those problems internally. And I'm going to charge you that extra $1 because we're going to have our people who are trained in handling these issues doing that, and I've got to pay them. And I don't back away from letting them know exactly where their money is going and the value that's being added. And when the systems run right, you take that Christmas gift order and every single stakeholder is happy when all of the administrative friction is handled on our side. When the experts that do this every single day are the ones doing it, you're not having to learn that you can't ship alcohol to that person by having it returned and then getting letters from Department of Alcohol, Firearms, and whatever it is, because you have broken the law and now you have legal ramifications from this. And so those relationships will typically turn into, this one moment that they were trying to gift, ultimately into a multi-million-dollar a year relationship, because we're able to deliver those experiences on the front end, the logistical support on the back end, and all of those elements that go into a branded merchandise experience that people just don't think about until it's right in their face and they have to do something about it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was thinking through the logistics of the international, and of course, there's going to be many. And then you start thinking even time zones and when you celebrate together, all of that. But then I started wondering, What is that good kind of back and forth between a vendor and procurement? What's that relationship like? How willing is procurement to listen? How willing are vendors to push back sometimes and kind of ideate on best practice and what's been, what's worked well for others? What's that relationship like typically when it's done well?
I mean, when it's done well, you have an innate problem solver. And I think that's, they're drawn to procurement, to that profession. It's unexpected that some of the most creative problem solvers I've met are actually in procurement. And you'd think you're going to encounter them in brand or creative or some of those places. But the logistical puzzles that they're solving all the time. And so when I can have a conversation with them, and I'm trying to get a feel of how well are they in touch with their stakeholders? How much do they understand about this category? Because procurement's dealing with so much, right? And branded merchandise, you're talking about less than 1% of a company's annual budget. But it can cost so much energy, effort, and frustration within an organization when it's done wrong. And so when I can have the conversation with them to understand their thinking, then anything is possible. But when I'm
Mm.
having those initial discussions with them, and I realize that they are trying to pigeonhole this into a commodity, there are opportunities that will just bow out and say, we're probably not your best vendor for that. And we're just not going to get involved because it will be an uphill battle. The stakeholders will always be disappointed, and procurement will always be disappointed, and it's not going to be successful for any of us. And there are times when, the request for proposal comes in, we'll read through it, we'll see what they're trying to ask for. And there's typically an opportunity for the Q&A, that back and forth during the referral process. And if we cannot have a strategic conversation or get some of those strategy questions answered in the Q&A, then it's also typically will back out because they're not
Mm.
thinking about it strategically. They're trying to pigeonhole it, or they're trying to control some variables they think they understand that they might not have a firm grasp on yet. I think some of the most amazing experiences we've had are when they come to us and instead of trying to just do a pricing comparison, they actually ask for a proposal. They ask, how would we solve this problem? And I think that gives them incredible insights into seeing how different partners in the RFP process would approach the whole scenario and what kind of solutions can be brought to the table that they have not surfaced in their internal discussions and discovery with their internal stakeholders. And so, there's a lot that can be done when the conversation is more fluid. There's not much that can be done when they rigidize it, they try to systematize it. They're again trying to compare paper A to paper A and they want apples to apples. In a world where we're making fruit salad, the fruit salad consumption experience can be different just based on how thinly you slice the apple. It's all going to have apples and oranges and melon. That how
Sure.
you cut it, how you prepare it, how you mix it, what kind of binding ingredients are you going to put on it? Or you're just going to toss it with a little lemon juice. It can be delicious every way, but the consumption experience is going to be different. So you can't use an apples to apples comparison without the full recipe and kind of giving your vendors an opportunity to show you what that recipe looks like. Go eat some salad with them first and see what this looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So if I'm a leader, it's a Monday morning, I'm thinking through procurement, I'm thinking through the merchandise process. If I'm that leader right now, what question should I be asking myself or asking a vendor beyond just, what's your price?
Yeah, internally, you're asking yourself, who on your team is actually going to be a stakeholder for this program? Who is going to own this and design and help you design the program to meet those internal stakeholder needs? And then when you're engaging with your vendor, really asking for those case studies, asking for programs that worked and programs that didn't work, asking for what they've learned, what they can bring to the table, and really thinking about how you can measure success beyond distribution and really diving into, what matters for those stakeholders. And maybe, meeting with your team and discussing what your process is for helping your supplier partners understand the business objective first. That, again, if they're only going to be going to their vendor and asking, I need 5,000 pens, or I need to place an order for 2,000 t-shirts, you've commoditized it and the strategy's been eliminated. And so if those strategic discussions are happening earlier, looping your vendor in at that point and saying, hey, this is our strategy, this is why, so that they can help you by getting the products that are going to reinforce the purpose of the promotion.
Yeah. And then for those procurement leaders who are used to, and the internal conversation is always about cost, how do you help them shift from costs, from dollars and cents to optimizing for impact?
I think for those procurement leaders, it's understanding the value added behaviors within the relationship. So instead of just thinking, cost of the commodity, thinking of the cost per impression, the value that's added in strengthened relationships, but also, the behavior change within the organization. So going back to that balloon vendor story, how much time is saved when you have one platform that everybody can order from? And so adding those values in the soft costs that are saved with labor and time and energy that were being expended internally on the accounting side, with the time the sales team was doing all of their own research and providing those vendors. And so trying to grab a handle on all of the costs within the organization that are going to be aggregated and absorbed, and recognizing that those costs aren't seen in, pricing a balloon at 10 cents or 20 cents, but understanding that all of those soft costs are being absorbed and then eliminated by providing these uniform solutions.
And what are some red flags that would show that a vendor is not going to be that good quality strategic partner?
If they're leading with a product catalog instead of questions, they're focused on product first. There's absolutely a place for product and ideas and high-level inspiration. But when you're having a strategic conversation, it needs to be a strategic conversation, and that needs to be led with questions. And they're digging for insights. If they don't ever ask about your business objectives, if you send out a questionnaire and you're asking for pricing on 20 items, and all they do is send you pricing on 20 items, and they never seek the purpose of the product, how it's being distributed, then you're not looking at a solution partner. You're just looking at a commodity supplier, and all those solutions are now going to be on your organization to fulfill. And all the cost of those solutions are going to be on your organization to deliver. And another red flag is if they can't articulate why something won't work. If you're making a request in the RFP and they just say that won't work, but they don't tell you why, that's kind of setting you up for a partnership of conflict where maybe they have deep insights, but they're not helping you understand. A good partner is going to help you do your job better by sharing your objectives and taking your mission as their mission and helping you deliver those operational objectives.
That's so good. And I know, Chris, you're putting together a bunch of resources that people can go to and just learn more about the procurement process, merchandise in general. Where can people go to learn more?
promobuyguide.com. It's where we're collecting those resources.
Perfect. So promobuyguide.com. Chrissy, thanks so much. Next week, we're going to talk about unboxing and why that moment matters more than you think. Thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for tuning in to this special episode of Working Forward. Want to be part of future conversations like this one? Join us inside our PFN community at bit.ly/PFN community, where the future of work is happening now. See you there.